Hey Rebels, when it comes to finding great places to eat, it helps if you track down experts like Allan Pulga. He's a local food writer for CBC who's plugged into the Regina culinary scene. I'm going to be asking him all about the best Filipino restaurants in the city, Filipino barbecue, and Filipino beer and more. Allan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt.
How's it going?
It's going great.
I'm really excited to get you on the show. It took me a little while to get you plugged in.
Oh, man. I'm just really, honestly, speechless. Yeah, no, I'm very flattered to be here, and this is fun. To those of you out there who might have spent time at the Carillon at the U of R around 2002, both Matt and I worked at the Carillon student newspaper at the U of R. And if I'm not mistaken, you covered a lot of sports stories with Matt Coxford. Is that right?
I worked with Matt Coxford. I didn't cover sports myself, but he's a good guy.
Yeah, love Matt. And he was in the same class as me at J School. Really good guy. I think he's in BC now.
My earliest Allan Pulga memory is you leading a pep rally at Campbell Collegiate.
Awesome. I hope it was a good one.
It was one of my very first high school memories.
That was a throat noise, so that just gave away that we're drinking beer right now.
Yeah.
The fact that I was leading pep rallies as SRC president back in high school, it set me on a path to be an extroverted, outgoing, open storytelling type of person, and I think that's kind of that shared passion for story. Is what brought us to this table today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cheers.
So you have a fascination with Filipino food.
I love Filipino food. Mark and I will sit here in the office and we just talk about our faves. This morning we were talking about savory food trip.
Okay.
And the adobo experience.
Okay. I've been to adobo, but I haven't been to savory. And did you enjoy your meal there?
Savory is Mark's favorite. He's
Okay.
like, it's obscure and it seems like nobody's ever in there.
Right, and I have yet to go in there.
He says
it's on 11th Avenue, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
says it's the best.
Okay.
He's like, you just have to go.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
No, I definitely want to check it out. What does he like to order when he goes there?
I think maybe you know Mark very well, but he's the kind of person who craves novelty. So he's always what's new.
Try something
what's
new.
Next?
Okay.
You know, he
takes their recommendation and goes
exactly. He's kind of my doorway and window into like the world of food and beer.
Okay.
Any recommendation he gives me, I trust.
Okay.
Implicitly. So for today's beer, we're drinking Cerveza Oscura, 4.2% ABV. It's our take on a smooth, dark version of our standard Cerveza beer.
Okay.
So you're not getting any salt and lime in this one, but it's that Mexican-inspired corn beer.
Okay. So would that be like a Negro Modelo? Is it made that way?
Similar kind of neighborhood.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit different because
Okay.
that would be a lager.
I see.
This would be technically an ale.
Gotcha.
But if your taste buds can tell the difference, I'd be surprised.
I can't, but it tastes good.
What are your first impressions when you drink it?
It definitely drinks like an ale. Less carbonation than a lager, and I can detect some coffee notes. But at the same time, it tastes kind of like a cerveza. Yeah, the acidity.
I feel like that corn is very prominent.
That must be it.
That sweet corn character on the finish.
That must be it.
The malt is kind of laid back and chill.
Yeah, very smooth.
Get that little bit of that dark,
Yeah.
lingering coffee roast, I would say.
Yeah.
No coffee in it, just
Yeah.
that's the malt.
Yeah. Oh, it tastes really good. Nice caramelization to it.
Would you recommend it to your friends?
100%.
But you
As I
said,
told you previously, I really like the regular Cerveza Rebellion number. It might be my favorite Rebellion beer. So for you to have me taste something that's a spin on that, yeah, it's on point, man.
Well, cheers.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we found one that you like.
Yeah, no, I like it. It's good.
So talk to me about your background with Filipino food.
You know
I'm
what?
sure you've got a lot of knowledge.
Well, I'm born and raised in a Filipino home. My parents immigrated to Regina back in the 70s. And back then, the Filipino community was really quite small. And everyone knew everyone. And it was a cool period of time to grow up in Saskatchewan as a Filipino kid, because of that close-knit community spirit. There were no Filipino restaurants at the time. So my understanding growing up of Filipino food was always home cooking, potlucks, mosaic, sort of community events. And to come out of that, people of my generation that grew up in the 80s and 90s, to come out of that into the 2000s, 2010 decade, where a huge wave of Filipino immigrants have come into the country. I mean, there used to be, I tell people there used to be one Filipino basketball league that my dad played in. And now in Regina, I believe there are 3. So
Really?
yeah, and if I run into a Filipino family at Superstore, for example, I might not know who they are or have ever met any of them. And that wasn't the case 20, 30 years ago. If you saw a Filipino family, you knew who they were. You grew up with their kids. It was a small, sort of like a small town. Everyone knows everyone, for better or for worse. But now we've sort of reached a critical mass, not just in Regina or in Saskatchewan, but across the country, where Filipino culture has become known. I think one of the stats in Saskatchewan is that Tagalog is the second most spoken language in Saskatchewan. So that tells you about, the size of our population. But also across the country, a few years ago, there was a study that indicated that Filipino immigration to Canada exceeded that of East Indians and I think Chinese. So I think we were like the number 1, maybe second after Chinese, for immigrant numbers year over year into Canada. And so, yeah, it's kind of, so now, because of all of that, Filipino food is having a moment in Canada, but also in the US. You see sort of, again, people of my generation who know North American cuisine and North American palates, but have that upbringing in a Filipino household, and are chefs or culinary trained professionals that say, let's bring our food into the foreground and celebrate it. And it's an exciting thing. Yeah, I think it's awesome. And so now, you mentioned a couple Filipino restaurants in town, Savory Food Trip and Adobo Express. There was also Pinoy Heat that was downtown, but it's since closed. I really liked Pinoy Heat, so I was disappointed to see that it had closed. And the fourth one is on 13th Avenue. It's called Fiesta Filipino. And that's a really good one. That's probably my favorite one of the ones I've tried. And the fifth one, or I should say the fourth one, because Pinoy Heat closed. So the fourth one is S.A. Favorito Foods on North Broad Street. I haven't been there yet. I actually went there when it was a fish and chips joint back in the day. And that was a pretty good fish and chips joint. But apparently not good enough to stay open anymore. It was called like London. It's called London something.
Okay, it was an English.
It was a British themed fish and chips joint that was across the street from that tea rooms.
Okay.
So I think they might have been sister businesses. But anyway, S.A. Favorito Foods is on North Broad. And if you're listening to this and you've had good food, tweet at me at Poonisms because I want to know what you had there.
The impact the Filipino community has had on our food scene is hard to understate. Like, it's fantastic. And it's like, why didn't it happen sooner? Because it feels like Filipino community is tight-knit and is fairly big in Regina.
It's true. You know what? I never understood that either, because obviously there's a strong Vietnamese community in Regina, and we have all kinds of Vietnamese restaurants in town. And I think maybe that entrepreneurial spirit in the Vietnamese community came from people that had come to Canada from Vietnam and really wanted to start their own business on their own and go out and be their own boss. Whereas the nature of the Filipino immigrant, and this is of course a huge sort of generalization, but to even get into the country, it was very labor focused. So if you're a nurse, come on in.
Tons of nurses.
Tons of nurses. If you're a mechanic or a welder, you want to come and work, for Brandt or Degelman Industries, stuff like that. A lot of my dad's friends had come in to Canada under those terms. So if you already have a skill and gainful employment, the lure of starting your own restaurant, I think, is a bit less than if you come here and you're just ready to bootstrap your business.
So it might have been the nature of the people we were trying to attract.
If I were to venture a guess, I think that would be one of the factors holding back prospective Filipino restaurants until now. Another one would be Filipino food is, and as you know, you've had it, it's less exotic than, say, Thai food or Vietnamese food. And I always explained it to my friends that way. There's not like, a lot of lemongrass or basil or even spicy, bird's eye chili in the food. As a accompaniment, like spicy vinegar, for example, we do have a lot of that. So there is heat and there is acid coming in a sort of garnish to a dish or a side seasoning to a dish. But in the cooking itself, it's not as fascinating to the North American palate off the hop as, say, Indian food or Thai food, both of which I love and are exotic to me too as a Filipino guy. So I think because of the Philippines' colonial heritage being first colonized by the Spanish and then in the 20th century colonized by the US, it has that tradition of really sort of garlic-based, salty Spanish cuisine, and then American sort of burgers and spaghetti and everything else, spam, that came in the 20th century and in World War II. So those two, of course, but then you have that sort of merchant exposure through Chinese business people and there's tons of Chinese people in the Philippines. So that influence on the cuisine is undeniable.
If you had to pick top 3 Filipino dishes people should order when they go to a Filipino restaurant in Regina, what would they be?
Well, the first one is adobo, because there's a reason why the Adobo Experience chain named themselves that. Adobo is kind of like roast beef and mashed potatoes to North Americans or the Brits, to the Filipino. If you were to have a comfort dish that your mom made for you since you were a kid, it's adobo. It'll be a chicken adobo or a pork adobo. And there are different regional styles of adobo, some of which use more soy sauce, so there's that Chinese influence I was telling you about, or less soy sauce, or none at all. There's always a garlic element, and there's always a vinegar element as well. And the types of vinegar you use, it could be a coconut vinegar or sugarcane vinegar, or white vinegar, what have you. So there are different, obviously, ingredients, but the core elements remain the same in an adobo. And so that would be number one. I think if anyone, any of my Canadian friends had come to my house and I was like proud of something for them to try, it would be adobo, because there's some weird stuff, or weird smelling stuff that my friends might come over to my house at, to experience, and I'd be like, yeah, maybe we don't start you off with that one. But adobo, totally easy entry point. It's basically every Filipino kid's favorite dish, because there's no vegetables in it. It's just meat with a brown gravy, and it's braised, and the meat falls off the bone, and you eat that on a bed of rice, and you're off to the races. So that's one.
Yeah.
Second thing I would recommend is a dish called kare kare, and that's an oxtail stew that has sort of like Chinese bok choy in it, and peanut butter. So it's, a lot of people start thinking of like satay or whatever, but it's not sweet like that. And it's slow cooked and braised, so the meat, again, falls off the bone, off the oxtail. It's a little bit sort of glutinous and sticky, so it wouldn't be an entry-level Filipino dish for everyone, texture-wise. But what takes it to another level is, I mentioned, garnishes and toppings, side toppings, seasonings. Bagoong alamang is what it's usually served with, and that's shrimp paste, fermented Filipino shrimp paste. And often it's sautéed with garlic to sort of add another layer of flavor to it and take away some of that sort of harsh, salty, briny flavor and just kind of smooth it out. But generally you have a big pot of this kare kare, you have your rice, and you sort of layer that on top of the rice, and then with every few bites, you bring in some of that shrimp paste, and it's a standard favorite dish among Filipinos, and it's definitely in my top 3 too. I just love that interplay of this really rich peanutty stew with garlicky, salty, sea shrimp flavors and rice. Like, honestly, my mouth's watering talking about it. Third thing is a dish called Lechon Kawali. And if you like pork belly, if you like rich pork dishes, Filipino food is right up your alley. We love the pig, and we celebrate all parts of the pig. And the pork belly, of course, being a favorite among many. It's sort of sliced into basically like 1-inch long strips, maybe 1/4 inch thick, and deep fried, so they're crispy. And then you get that, just like bacon, you have that layer of fat and then meat and then sort of fat meat in between, and crispy on the outside. So you get that sort of crackling on the edge too. And so you dip that generally in like a liver-based sweet sauce. We're all about condiments in the Philippines, so it's like rare that you would eat a dish just on its own. Adobo being an exception in that case. But yeah, a lot of dishes often, especially pulutan, which I'm going to get into with you shortly, beer that is meant to be eaten with, food that's meant to be eaten when drinking beer or alcohol. Yeah. It's basically like appetizers or like finger foods. Pulutan almost always has a vinegar dip, or because it's so fatty and rich, you need some acid to cut into that fat. So yeah. So those would be the 3 things.
My mouth is watering.
Adobo, kare-kare, or Lechon Kawali. So lechon means roast pig, but Lechon Kawali is that specific pork belly dish.
That's awesome. Everything sounds good. I'm like, oh, I'm just hungry. What's wanting it now?
Yeah, no, we'll have to go for Filipino food sometime together, and then we can take this conversation in a practical sense.
You said something to me that kind of took me back to one of my high school experiences, grade 12, first year university. I'm hanging out with my buddy Jay Ferozden, and his mom's Pakistani, and we're getting ready to go out to the bar. We're having a few drinks, and I'm like, I got to get some food in me or I'm going to be sick, because I just can't handle an empty stomach with that much booze. And he goes, I got you. And we open up his fridge, and it's all this delicious Pakistani food. And I'm like, what's this? I've never had this before. And he goes, oh, just have it. He's like, I won't even tell you. Just eat it. You'll like it. And he's like, here, eat this. And he's like, this is hot. Try this. He's like, just be careful. It's hot. Don't touch your eyes, And it was such a window and a doorway into that culinary experience and his family. And yes. It kind of became the theme of when Matt came over to Jay's house before going out to the bar to have drinks. His mom would feed us, and she'd like fill out the table, and I'm just like, oh man, this is so good.
That's incredible.
It was like this awesome experience. So when you're saying I'd bring my friends over and be like, okay, what could we feed?
Yeah,
you?
What can I curate for you?
That brought back all those memories of me hanging out with Jay.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about living in a multicultural society like we have here in Canada is that you get to experience that in a very intimate setting with your friends and with their families. And even before some of that, particularly in Saskatchewan, we didn't have the most diverse culinary scene growing up. You know what I mean? It's come a long way. But for many of us, yeah, our first encounter with ethnic cuisine in Regina was at a buddy's house. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really special thing.
And it changed our lives forever, because now we just go Caraway Grill, we just kill it, right?
Yeah.
India House and Flavors of India.
For sure.
And even Sky Bistro.
Yeah.
You go there and it's like, wow.
I love that restaurant. Yeah, absolutely. And so Chef Milton Rebello and his wife, who's Chinese, they have brought that culinary heritage to their restaurant and inform a very global menu with their own experiences. It's pretty sweet.
I take my wife there. We go there for dates and stuff, and I've never been disappointed with the food. Value for dollar, I've always like, this was worth every penny.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great restaurant. We're lucky to have it, honestly. Yeah.
Did your grandma or your mom have like a very secret dish that you still treasure? Like, I think back to my grandma's pierogies and cabbage rolls. Do you have one of those?
My grandma she was a good cook, but she wasn't like the most amazing cook. And so I don't, and not, Grandma, I love you. You're in heaven right now. But if I were to assign a dish to my childhood, it would actually be my dad's sinigang.
Sinigang.
Yeah, sinigang. And sinigang is, so I already gave you my top 3 dishes, but I needed some vegetables and I had to bring in a 4th, favorite dish in Filipino cuisine. It's sinigang. And I mentioned the acidity, flavor in cuisine for Filipino cuisine. Sinigang is where acidity really shines. It's a unique soup, and it can be a pork-based soup if you like cook it with pork ribs, for example, or more typically it's a seafood-based soup. So you'll make it with shrimp or with fish, and a variety of vegetables. Again, you'd have like the bok choy cabbage type vegetable or a leafy vegetable. Sometimes you can put spinach in there too. So there's a green leafy vegetable in there. There's sort of daikon, white radish in there for texture, different texture. There's onion, there's tomato. So you get this sort of oniony tomato type broth, but what gives it a sour note is either calamansi, which is like a little kumquat, sort of little Filipino lime. You might have seen them at Filipino restaurants, for example. Often they're orange and there's just like a tiny 1-inch sphere. And it's a prominent citrus fruit in Filipino cuisine. So there'll be some of that.
And you crush it on top?
It would be cooked with the calamansi juice in there. And most importantly, tamarind. So like in Indian cuisine, you have tamarind. And this would be sort of, I think, more unripe tamarind. So you get the really sour ones, less sweet, because obviously tamarind chutney is a big condiment in Indian cuisine. It's sweet, but this is like, it's way more sour in the Filipino sinigang treatment of it. And so you have this sour soup, and people are like, oh, is it like hot and sour soup? Like, what you have at Vietnamese restaurants or Thai restaurants? No, it's just sour. Technically, there is some hot. Like you might have like a big chili pepper in there to give it some heat. But what the star of the sinigang show is sour. And so, my dad, for example, he'll like squeeze a bunch of lemons in there too, on top of, because tamarind wasn't readily available as much as it is now. Like you can get it at Superstore now, fresh tamarind, and cook with it. And my dad does do that. But growing up, we always used like the sinigang mix in a bag, the powderized tamarind with all kinds of other MSG and whatnot. But that stuff is awesome. Like that's always the sinigang I grew up making. And to a certain extent, I prefer that to making it from scratch, because that's how I know how to make sinigang. So that was my dad's dish, and that was his secret, secret dish and secret recipe, I guess.
I'm going to make a lot of people angry. I don't think MSG is a bad thing.
Oh, no, I totally agree.
I think MSG is fantastic, and it was just like a fad, fear-mongering nonsense.
It was very much a fear-mongering thing, and I had to like research it to make sure it's okay, and that debunk the myths that it like causes Alzheimer's or something. It doesn't do any of that.
It was all in people's heads.
Yeah, and your body metabolizes it just like salt. It's a glutamic acid. It's umami.
It's delicious.
It's delicious. Yeah, I agree. It's on your Doritos, and it's on your instant ramen, and I love both of those things.
Yeah.
And I turned out okay.
Right?
So, and it's in my sinigang mix too, like I was saying, dude. So, yeah, honestly, if something sends me back to my childhood from, the Filipino food I grew up eating, it's sinigang. And my dad, so a Regina-centric story associated with my dad's sinigang is, my dad had a hookup at Pacific Fresh Fish.
Nice.
So he would go there and they would cut expensive halibut steaks off of a big piece of halibut that had been shipped in from, I don't know, Alaska. And the collars or the cuttings that wouldn't make it into the Pacific Fresh Fish display, the guy would save them instead of tossing them, and sell them to my dad for probably like a nickel.
Yeah.
And my dad would bring these prized, cuttings from, an expensive halibut steak and boil them in our sinigang. And I didn't know it at the time, but this was like, yeah, we're getting fresh halibut. This is like, five-star restaurant.
You're the third guest on our show to talk about Pacific Fresh Fish.
It's a hookup.
I think I need to get them on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely, and be like, thank you for, connecting Saskatchewan diners with fresh, delicious product that would otherwise be very difficult to acquire in town. So
They also supply a lot of the restaurants, don't they?
I imagine they do. I mean, you gotta. If you want to eat more than, just meat and sausage and regular Saskatchewan fare.
I'm going to be a little greedy here. I'm going to bring us all the way back to pork.
Okay.
Because I've read articles, I've seen documentaries, and I've had the barbecue pig, but I haven't had like the classic Filipino barbecue pig.
Okay.
You gotta tell me, what's this all about?
Okay, so you're talking about like the full roast pig. Now, growing up in Saskatchewan, when there was a big event, like, somebody's 30th wedding anniversary or something, my dad and some of the other sort of uncles, fathers, leaders of the Filipino community, they would go to a farm and buy a pig and like gut it and stick it on a spit and roast it over a fire. And to me, growing up in Canada, this massive animal that they're roasting, I'm like, okay, that's lechon. That is the Filipino roast pig. And it wasn't until I went to the Philippines and saw them roasting little pigs, little tiny ones, that I realized that little pig that feeds a family as opposed to a huge, massive pig that feeds, dozens and dozens of many families. That's the famous lechon of the Philippines. And so it's suckling pig. It's kind of like how you want veal, you want, this immature animal or lamb that's prized. Well, in Filipino culture, the suckling pig, so a pig that has not yet been weaned off its mother, not to be savage or anything, but it hasn't eaten solid food yet. It's only had the milk from its mother's teat. That's the one you roast.
Okay.
Because that meat will be so tender and so rich and so delicious, and not, toiling in the pig pen with the other animals. It's just this like really silky, really delicious pork. And because it's small, you can manipulate it more easily over the fire. And the skin is so crispy and so caramelized from the fat on the outside that is almost magical. Kind of like, Peking barbecue duck, how you get that exterior on that, smoking off the coals and sealing in all that flavor. And yeah, just getting that glossy, delicious finish on the outside. That's what you get with a proper suckling pig lechon in the Philippines. Now, there is some distinction between how they grill, how they roast a pig on a spit in other parts of the Philippines versus Cebu. So Cebu is a central Visayan island in the archipelago of the Philippines. It's one of the largest ones in the middle there. And so it's both an island and a city. So the city of Cebu is the most populous city in the central Filipino region, and it has its own language, Cebuano. And so Cebuano style lechon is famous as being the best lechon in the Philippines because they bring aromatics into the seasoning. It's kind of like how we do a turkey here. They put, herbs, I'm not even sure which ones.
Rosemary, thyme.
Yeah, rosemary, thyme, what have you. Filipino version of those in the pig. And one of my issues with growing up eating what I thought was lechon was, it wasn't a suckling pig, so it wasn't like as soft and tender as, a baby one. But also, I found it bland. I found it tasted too fleshy, like it lacked seasoning. So, it just had salt and pepper, and then you put this sort of liver-based sweet lechon sauce on it, which was fine. But if it had a bit of flavor from herbs and spices beyond salt and pepper, I would have appreciated it more, I think, in hindsight. And that's what they do on the Cebuano style. Cebuano style lechon. And Anthony Bourdain, may he rest in peace, he had one of those when he went to Cebu for no reservations, and it looked incredible. So if you recall that episode of Anthony Bourdain going to the Philippines, eating a roast pig, well, he had the real thing. He had the Cebuano suckling pig.
That's on my bucket list.
Yeah.
Like, I want to go there and just do that.
You'd be in good hands, because we, the Filipinos, are famously good hosts. And I mean, if you know any Filipinos, we have this really great reputation, and I'm proud of it, of always being jolly, always being happy, and just, a gregarious, welcoming people. And I'm very proud of that heritage that, I'm a part of.
I train martial arts. I train Aikido. I've been training for over 10 years. And one of the kids in the kids class, he's Filipino. And his family's been uploading pictures of their trip from the Philippines. And they're like, oh yeah, we had to bundle up in blankets and we're getting ready for parkas and stuff. And they're telling us it's like plus 22.
It's very hot. Yes, exactly. I don't know what the average temperature is year round, but I'm sure it's close to 30, if not above 30. My parents are from the north west of the Philippines, a province called Zambales. And I went to go visit when my brother was working there. He actually worked in media, and he was a fashion model for some time. He got the looks in the family. Like, if you're listening to this and you've never seen what I look like, I'm very average looking. My brother takes it to another level. So I got the smarts, he got the looks. That's how it works sometimes.
There's the dig.
Yeah. But I went to go visit him, and I had never previously. I'd only been to the Philippines in the summertime. Like, we would take a break from school and go back with my mom and dad. And so our summer is rainy season in the Philippines. So it wasn't like sweltering. It was hot, but it was raining and cooler than it would be in midsummer. And so when I went to visit my brother, it was in April and May. And that's like the hottest it gets in the Philippines. And it was like 40 plus, 98% humidity. And I'd never experienced heat like that before. It was just like, if you didn't have air conditioning, you were crippled under the weight of the heat. It was just nuts.
How did you survive?
You're just sweating constantly.
How do you live?
Even at night.
How do you survive?
You need air conditioning. Like, you got to go to a mall. Like, if you've ever seen Filipinos, we love malls. Yeah, that's been bred into us from an early age, especially if you're from the Philippines, because that was like your only respite from the insane heat during the day. It was to go to an air-conditioned shopping facility.
So it'd be similar to, say, the Spanish, or maybe in Mexico with the siesta culture, where everybody kind of takes a break at the hottest points of the day.
For sure.
And then the city kind of opens up and becomes active at 9 p.m.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's a tropical thing too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not out to lunch then.
No. And it just kind of, business would grind to a halt, and sort of pick up again once it cools off a little bit. Yeah.
If people have been listening to this podcast and they want to find out more about what you're writing and what you're doing, where should they go?
Well, you can just Google CBC Saskatchewan Regina Bites, and it'll give you a sort of list of the restaurants that I've visited here in Regina over the past 8 or 9 months. We've tried to do one a month, so I think we've got 8 up there on the website right now. You can follow me on social media. I'm at Poonisms. My nickname is Poon, so Poonisms is my handle. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter. See you on there.
Alan, I want to thank you for your time today.
Hey, it's been my pleasure, dude. Good to see you again.
I appreciate you sharing a beer with me.
Hey, that's been my pleasure, too. Cheers, Matt.
Cheers. Rebels, thanks for listening today. I'm going to include links to Alan's stuff so you can find it all if you haven't already Googled it. I really want you to check out places that he's recommending. I'm also going to recommend to you Tipsy Samurai and Sky Cafe. Shamelessly, they carry our beer, but their food is fantastic. You got to support them. You got to support local. I love it. I'm also proud to let you know that the Rebellion Brewing podcast is an affiliate member of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. If you're into podcasting or you're into great local content produced right here in our province, the Sask Podcast Network at saskpodcastnetwork.com is a great one-stop shop to discover local stories to listen to. As always, Thank you for joining the Rebellion.